My name is Ryan, and that happened when I was 19. At the time, I was living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and spent weekends exploring abandoned places with my friends. We weren't exactly ghost hunters, but we enjoyed the adrenaline rush of entering forgotten places away from the eyes of the city. That evening, we decided to visit an old disused railway tunnel on the outskirts of the city. It was a place shrouded in strange stories, people who came in and never left, echoes that belonged to no one, and the kind of stuff that only seemed to exist on obscure internet forums. There were 4 of us, me, Nick, Brandon, and Josh. We grabbed our flashlights, backpacks, and a few bottles of water, and drove for almost an hour until we found the entrance to the tunnel, covered in weeds and rusty hardware. The air there was already strange, heavy, with a smell of humidity and something I couldn't define. Nick was the first to enter, laughing and screaming to hear the echo of his own voice. We followed behind, forming a line in the middle of the dense darkness. Our flashlights illuminated only small sections of the tunnel at a time, revealing moss-covered walls and faded graffiti. At first, we tried to keep the mood light. Brandon made jokes, Nick pretended to be scared, and Josh and I just kept going, listening to the dripping water somewhere far away. The ground was uneven, covered with loose stones and corroded rails. The cold inside was different, a cold that stuck to the skin and didn't seem to come only from the temperature. After a few minutes of walking, Josh pointed to the wall and frowned. "What is this?" He illuminated the place with his flashlight, and what we saw made us stop. They were handprints, many. Some small, like children's, others huge, disproportionate. The strangest thing was how high some of them were, above our reach, as if someone or something had climbed the wall to leave them there. We were silent for a moment, until Nick stepped forward and touched one of them with his fingertips. "It's wet," he muttered. We all looked at each other, and for the first time that night, no one laughed. We decided to move on, even though something in the back of my mind screamed for us to turn around. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, and the darkness in front of us was almost solid. With each step, the air grew heavier and the silence became more uncomfortable. It was Brandon who suggested we go back. "It's enough, man. This place is strange," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. We agreed, turned around and started walking back. It was then that we realized something that didn't make sense. The echo of our footsteps was not right. There seemed to be more. Echoes of footsteps mixed with ours. We stopped immediately. The silence that followed was suffocating. All we could hear was the restrained breathing of each of us and the slight drip of water on the walls. Brandon was the first to speak, trying to force a nervous laugh. "It must be the sound of the echo itself, right?" But we all knew it wasn't. The sound of footsteps not only continued, but seemed to slow down along with us, as if someone was imitating us. Nick pointed the flashlight back, but we only saw the dense darkness and faint glow of moisture reflecting off the walls. "Let's get out of here now," Josh said, his voice strained. We quickened our pace, trying to keep our composure, but the discomfort grew. The echo still didn't make sense. There was a wrong time signature, something out of rhythm. It was Brandon who noticed first. "Is anyone counting?" he muttered, not taking his eyes out of the way. At the same moment, I felt a shiver run down my spine. There were 4 of us, but there were more shadows cast on the tunnel wall. My heart raced. A second before, I was sure we were alone, but there, next to Josh's shadow, was another. An elongated, displaced figure that moved at the same pace as us. Nick cursed softly and pointed the flashlight in the direction of the figure, but the light flickered and revealed nothing. It was as if it was always in the blind spot of vision, just a subtle presence, but impossible to ignore. "Don't look back," I whispered, feeling my stomach turn. The air in the tunnel felt heavier, as if something invisible was pressing us forward. My whole body was screaming to run, but something told me that it would only make the situation worse. We keep walking, trying to ignore the weight of that unwanted presence. The steps continued, always synchronized with ours, but now a little closer. The exit from the tunnel still seemed too far away. The dim light of the entrance was only an indistinct point ahead. Every second seemed to drag on, and the feeling that something was there, very close, made me nauseous. Then, out of nowhere, Nick stopped abruptly and held his breath. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. The silence was so absolute that I could hear the blood pulsing in my ears. And then, softly, barely noticeable, a sound seeped into the air. A hoarse whisper coming from behind us. The whisper was low, almost a hum carried by the humid air of the tunnel. I wanted to believe that it was just the wind going through the cracks in the walls, but there was something unsettling about it. It wasn't a natural sound. It was as if someone was trying to form words, but without enough strength to speak. My body froze. Brandon held my arm tightly, his fingers digging into my skin. "Keep walking," he muttered, and we obeyed. Every step now seemed like an eternity. My eyes kept moving, trying to catch any sign of movement around us. The tunnel seemed longer than when we entered. I could no longer distinguish if we were close to the exit or if we were simply walking in circles. Josh began to breathe heavily, visibly panicked. "That's not right," he stammered. What happened next made my blood run cold. The beam of light from Nick's flashlight flickered, and for a split second I saw something on the wall next to us, a shadow, but not ours. She was leaning against the damp stone, motionless, as if she were watching us. When the light stabilized, there was nothing there. I wanted to believe it was my mind playing tricks, but by the look of Nick, I knew he had seen it too. "Run," he whispered, and that's what we did. The sound of our footsteps multiplied, as if dozens of other footprints echoed in the tunnel. It was impossible to know which ones belonged to us and which ones didn't. My lungs burned, but I didn't dare stop. The entrance to the tunnel seemed close now, a faint rectangle of light calling us back to safety. But then, very close to my ear, I heard that whisper again. The sound was so clear, so real, that I felt the warm air against my skin. My whole body shivered. My feet failed for an instant and I almost stumbled, but I forced myself to continue. We were too close to stop. Now, the exit was there within reach, but something inside me knew that whisper. He didn't want to let us go so easily. The last stretch of the tunnel seemed endless. The air was heavy, as if we were being pulled back. Each step was a struggle against an invisible weight. The whisper continued, but now it seemed to be everywhere, enveloping us. It wasn't just a whisper, there were several. Murmuring whispers I couldn't fully understand, like a muffled chorus, mixed with the echo of our own footsteps. Nick was the first to reach the exit. He tripped as he crossed it, falling to his knees in the damp dirt outside. Brandon and Josh soon followed behind, panting, but I hesitated for a second. Something inside me said that if I looked back at that moment, I would see what I shouldn't. My whole body trembled and I felt a shiver run up my spine, making me shiver. Then, without thinking, I took the last step out. The cool night air hit my face like a punch. The silence outside was deafening. The tunnel, which had once seemed endless, was now nothing more than a black, motionless mouth behind us. Nobody said anything. Nick was pale, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Did you see that?" His voice was little more than a whisper. We looked at each other, but no one answered, because admitting meant accepting that we weren't alone inside, that something was there, watching us, walking by our side, maybe even touching us without just noticing. Brandon rubbed his arms as if he were cold. "Let's get out of here," he said, breaking his silence. And without arguing, we began to move away from the tunnel, leaving that darkness behind. We walked to the car in silence. The noise of our own footsteps on the dirt road seemed louder than usual. When we finally got into the vehicle, Nick started the engine with trembling hands. I looked in the rearview mirror and the tunnel was still there, motionless in the middle of nowhere. But for a moment, before Nick took off, I had the feeling that something was standing in the driveway. The road back seemed darker than when we came. The trees seemed to lean over us, forming long, distorted shadows on the asphalt. Nobody said anything. The radio was off, and the only sound was the roar of the engine and the heavy breathing of everyone in the car. I still felt a strange weight in my chest, as if something had stuck to me after coming out of that tunnel. Brandon broke his silence first. "You noticed that our footsteps didn't beat?" His voice came out shaky, and I knew he was trying to find a logical explanation. "Maybe it was just the echo," I suggested. but even I didn't believe it. Josh, who was in the back seat, let out a nervous laugh. "Echo doesn't whisper in your ear." The phrase hung in the air, and no one knew what to answer. My eyes were fixed on the road ahead, but my mind was still there inside the tunnel, reliving every detail. The handprints, the extra steps, that shadow that moved along with us, and the voice. I wanted to believe that all that had been just collective paranoia, the result of the tension of the moment. But something inside me said it wasn't that simple. Nick squeezed the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. "I saw something," he said suddenly, "on the wall, when my flashlight failed." My stomach turned. I knew exactly what he was talking about. "It was like a shadow, but not ours," I added, and Nick just nodded, swallowing. The silence in the car became even heavier. Brandon fiddled with his phone, probably trying to distract himself. But then, I saw his face turn pale on the illuminated screen. "What?" I asked, already preparing myself for the worst. He hesitated, then turned his cell phone over for everyone to see. The screen showed a photo, which he took as soon as we entered the tunnel. In the corner, in the midst of the darkness, something stood out. It wasn't one of us. My heart raced when I looked at the image. The light from the lantern reflected off our silhouettes, but in the corner, where there should have been only darkness, there was something more. A diffuse figure, taller than any of us, like a shadow that should not exist. It was impossible to tell if it had a face, but the feeling it conveyed was clear. It was watching us. "This is not real. It must be some reflection," Nick muttered, trying to find a justification, but his voice trembled. "So, tell me, reflection of what?" Brandon countered, frustration evident. The car was moving, but the silence inside seemed more stifling than in the tunnel. Each of us tried to process it in a different way, but deep down we knew it wasn't a reflection of light. I looked in the rearview mirror, unable to contain the impulse. The deserted road stretched out behind us, but something seemed to be wrong. There were no more streetlights or house lights along the way, as if we were driving through a different place. "Nick, did you take the right path?" He did not respond immediately, tightening the steering wheel even more. "I think so." His hesitation made me swallow hard. The GPS on the dashboard was stuck, the route frozen in a position that didn't correspond to anything. The road seemed to repeat itself, as if we were passing through the same stretch over and over again. With each turn, the discomfort increased. The sensation of what we felt in the tunnel was still there, stuck to the skin like an invisible weight. Brandon looked out the window with wide eyes. "Dude, there is no longer any sign." None. The car continued for a few more minutes, until suddenly the city lights appeared ahead again, as if we had crossed an invisible barrier. The GPS unlocked, and the map returned to normal. "What was that?" Josh blurted out, looking back. "But what?" We saw made my blood run cold. In the mirror, the road looked different, as if we were leaving something behind. Nobody said anything. We just stare in the rearview mirror, unable to look away. My heart was beating so hard that I could feel the blood pulsing in my ears. Nick put the pedal to the metal, and the car shot down the illuminated avenue, leaving that thing behind. The silence inside the car was heavy, suffocating. No one wanted to talk about what they had seen, but we all knew we had seen the same thing. Josh rubbed his face with trembling hands. That wasn't something in our heads, and that was there. His voice came out weak, almost like a whisper, and it was following us. The words hung in the air, leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. Brandon still held his cell phone, the screen showing the photo taken in the tunnel. I wanted to tell him to delete it, so we could pretend that nothing happened, but I couldn't. Something told me that even if we tried to forget it, we wouldn't forget it. The road was now familiar. The lights of the city surrounded us, but the sense of danger did not pass. When we finally arrived at Nick's house, no one wanted to get out of the car first. That moment felt like a kind of threshold, as if we were letting something into our lives. "If something strange happens and anything, let me know," Nick said, breaking his silence. We all nodded, but we knew that none of us wanted that to happen. I just wanted to go home, lock myself in the room and try to forget. That night, lying in bed, I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. But at some point, I had the feeling that I wasn't alone. The room was dark, silent, but something seemed to move. In the shadow of the corner, I took a deep breath, refusing to open my eyes, because deep down the fear was still there. Time passed, and we all went on with our lives, avoiding talking about that night in the tunnel. It wasn't a pact or something. Agreed, but it seemed that no one wanted to relive it. From time to time, someone would bring up the subject hesitantly, always with the same expression of incredulity, as if they still didn't fully believe what we saw. "Have you ever stopped to think if that really happened?" Brandon once remarked, absent-mindedly stirring his glass of beer, but no one ever answered. Maybe because deep down we all knew the truth. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel.